When the gilded doors of the Plaza Hotel swung open, the whispers in the glittering ballroom instantly died. They had intentionally assigned her a seat right next to the swinging kitchen doors, fully expecting the discarded ex-wife to cower in a clearance rack dress, humiliated before New York's elite. Instead, she arrived fashionably late, dripping in century-old diamonds, stepping out of a state-crested Bentley, and the handsome man holding her hand. He wasn't just a plus one. He was European royalty. The ultimate revenge wasn't a screaming match, it was a crown. The invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday in London, delivered by a courier directly to the mahogany doors of a private Mayfair townhouse. It was unnecessarily heavy, crafted from triple-thick ivory cardstock with beveled edges and genuine gold leaf lettering. Penelope stared at it as it sat on her marble kitchen island, her name elegantly yet mockingly calligraphed across the envelope, Ms. Penelope Hayes. It was from Gregory, her ex-husband, and he was marrying Vanessa Kensington. Penelope didn't cry. She hadn't shed a tear over Gregory in nearly 3 years. But the sheer audacity of the gesture made a cynical smile play at the corners of her lips. She knew exactly what this was. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a subpoena to her own humiliation. 5 years ago, Penelope and Gregory had been a completely different story. They had met when they were both struggling in Boston. She had been working grueling 60-hour weeks as a clinical research coordinator to keep a roof over their heads while Gregory poured every ounce of his energy and her savings into building his boutique financial firm. She had been his anchor. The woman who ironed his only suit for investor meetings and ate instant noodles so he could take prospective clients out for steak dinners. But as soon as the firm struck gold, landing a multi-million-dollar acquisition deal, Gregory's tastes evolved. He suddenly found Penelope's practicality stifling. He told her she didn't know how to navigate the elite circles his new life required. Enter Vanessa Kensington, a billionaire real estate heiress who possessed the exact pedigree, old money connections, and ruthless superficiality Gregory suddenly craved. Within 6 months of meeting Vanessa at a charity gala, Gregory had packed his bags, leaving Penelope with a modest settlement and a shattered reality. During the divorce, Vanessa hadn't just been the other woman, she had been a tormentor. She had made sure the tabloids caught wind of their affair, painting Penelope as the dreary, uncultured starter wife who simply couldn't keep up with a rising titan of industry. Now picking up the invitation, Penelope noted the date and the venue, the Plaza Hotel, New York City. The wedding of the decade or so, the society pages were already claiming. "Is that what I think it is?" A deep, smooth voice with a subtle, aristocratic European lilt broke Penelope's train of thought. She turned to see her husband leaning against the archway of the kitchen. Dominic wasn't just a man, he was an event. Tall, with dark, perfectly tailored hair and piercing hazel eyes, he possessed the kind of effortless, terrifying confidence that came from 1,000 years of untainted lineage. Officially, he was His Serene Highness, Prince Dominic of the House of Valois-Bourgogne. To the world, he was a heavily guarded, fiercely private royal who sat on the board of international sovereign wealth funds. To Penelope, he was the man who had bumped into her at a quiet art gallery in Florence, while she was trying to heal her broken heart, charmed her with his self-deprecating humor, and married her in a completely private ceremony in a Swiss chateau 6 months ago. Penelope had wiped all her social media clean the day her divorce from Gregory was finalized. She had disappeared from the American radar entirely. As far as Gregory, Vanessa, and their venomous circle of friends, new Penelope was still living in a cramped apartment in Chicago, quietly mourning the life she lost. They had absolutely no idea that she was now a princess. "It's an invitation to Gregory's wedding," Penelope said, sliding the heavy cardstock across the marble counter. Dominic picked it up, his eyes scanning the ostentatious gold foil. A slow, dangerous smirk formed on his face. "The Plaza. How incredibly cliché. I assume they sent this to rub your nose in their newfound joy." Vanessa thrives on an audience," Penelope replied, pouring herself an espresso. "She's banking on me not showing up. It allows her to play the magnanimous bride who tried to include her husband's bitter ex, knowing full well I wouldn't have the money to fly to New York or the wardrobe to compete with her high society friends. And if I do show up, she's banking on me looking pathetic. Dominic set the invitation down and walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, looking at the invitation. So, what are you going to do? Penelope leaned back against his chest, feeling the warmth and solid reassurance of him. She thought about the years of sacrifice, the gaslighting, the sheer cruelty with which she was discarded. She thought about Vanessa's smug face on the cover of Manhattan luxury magazines parading the life Penelope had helped build. I think, Penelope said softly, a spark igniting in her eyes. It would be terribly rude to decline such a generous invitation. Dominic's smile widened, his eyes glinting with predatory anticipation. Darling, if we are going to New York, we are doing it properly. Call the royal dressmaker. I'll have the consulate prepare the motorcade. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Vanessa Kensington had spared no expense, quite literally draining $1 million into floral arrangements alone. Cascading walls of white orchids, imported crystal chandeliers, and gold-rimmed glassware transformed the room into a blinding display of wealth. Standing on the mezzanine adjusting his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, Gregory Wallace looked down at the empire he had married into. He felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. He had made it. It's perfect, isn't it? Vanessa purred, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Her custom Vera wine gown was a masterpiece of lace and silk, clinging to her perfectly sculpted figure. Almost as perfect as you, Gregory said, turning to kiss her. I just checked the final seating arrangements with Francois. Vanessa said, a wicked, triumphant gleam in her eyes. She actually RSVP'd yes. Can you believe it? The audacity. Gregory sighed, feigning exhaustion, though a part of him was deeply satisfied that Penelope was coming. He wanted her to see this. He wanted her to see the vast gulf between what she could offer him and what he currently had. I told you she would. She never could let go. Where did you put her? Vanessa giggled, a sharp, cold sound. Table 89. Gregory raised an eyebrow. Is there even a table 89? There is now. Vanessa smirked. It's squeezed between the swinging doors of the kitchen and the service hallway. She'll be seated with the backup photographer's my weird uncle who smells like mothballs, and the date of my mother's acupuncturist. I made sure her chair is the one constantly getting bumped by the waiters bringing out the prime rib. Gregory chuckled. A bit harsh, isn't it? Oh, please. Vanessa rolled her eyes. She needs to know her place. Your mother specifically requested she not be anywhere near the family tables. Brenda said she couldn't stomach the sight of her thrift store fashion ruining the wedding photos. Downstairs, Gregory's mother, Brenda, was already holding court near the champagne tower, draped in pearls and a severe attitude. She was currently loudly informing anyone who would listen about the guest list. Yes, well, Gregory is simply too kind-hearted, Brenda was saying to a group of socialites holding flutes of Dom Perignon. He insisted on sending his ex-wife an invitation out of pity. The poor girl has absolutely nothing going for her. I hear she's still single, likely living in some dreadful little studio apartment. We're just praying she doesn't cause a scene or show up wearing something polyester. The wedding ceremony held at a prestigious cathedral earlier that afternoon had gone off without a hitch. Penelope had been notably absent. Vanessa had taken it as a sign of cowardice, assuming Penelope had flown to New York, lost her nerve at the last minute, and was currently crying in a cheap hotel room. As the cocktail hour drew to a close, and the 500 elite guests began filtering into the grand ballroom to find their seats, the atmosphere was electric with gossip. Vanessa's bridal party had deliberately leaked the information that the starter wife was attending. People were whispering, craning their necks, looking for the inevitable tragic figure of Penelope Hayes. Table 89. Francois, the high-strung wedding planner, barked into his headset. Make sure the centerpiece on table 89 is lowered. We don't want to waste the good orchids on the vendor table. Is she here yet? Brenda asked Francois, tapping her foot impatiently. No sign of Ms. Hayes, ma'am, Francois replied. The doors close in 10 minutes for the grand entrance of the bride and groom. Vanessa, waiting in the VIP holding suite, checked her diamond-encrusted watch. If she's late, don't let her in until after our first dance. I want her to have to walk in while the lights are up and everyone is watching. I want her to do the walk of shame right to the kitchen." Everything was set. The trap was laid. The high society of New York was primed to witness the ultimate humiliation of the woman who simply wasn't good enough. Outside the plaza, the New York evening was crisp and clear. The velvet ropes were up, keeping the throngs of tourists and aggressive paparazzi at bay. The paparazzi were out in full force. The Kensington Wallace wedding was a major society event, and billionaire tycoons, politicians, and A-list actors had been stepping out of black SUVs for the past hour. But at exactly 7:15 p.m., the standard rhythm of black Escalades and Mercedes-Benzes was abruptly interrupted. The low rumbling purr of a massive engine echoed down Fifth Avenue. A police escort, 2 NYPD motorcycles with flashing lights cleared the intersection. Following them was an imposing jet-black vehicle that instantly sucked the air out of the street. It was a Bentley Mulsanne Grand Limousine, custom-built, stretched, and armored. But it wasn't the sheer size of the car that made the paparazzi lower their cameras in confusion. It was the diplomatic crest emblazoned in gold on the doors and the small Royal Standard flags fluttering crisply from the front fenders. "Who the hell is that?" a photographer muttered, rapidly adjusting his zoom lens. "Is the mayor here? The president? That's not a U.S. flag, you idiot." Another photographer snapped his camera, clicking furiously. "That's European, Royal Standard." The massive Bentley glided to a halt, right at the red carpet leading up the plaza steps. Immediately, a black Range Rover pulled up sharply behind it. 4 men in immaculately tailored dark suits stepped out of the Range Rover simultaneously. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of elite state-level security. They secured the perimeter in seconds, completely ignoring the valet who had frozen in his tracks. One of the security details stepped forward and opened the heavy rear door of the Bentley. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers, photographers, and a few lingering wedding guests who had stepped out for a smoke. First came a silver strappy stiletto stepping onto the pavement. Then a woman emerged. It was Penelope. But she was unrecognizable from the exhausted, stressed woman who had signed divorce papers 3 years ago. She looked like an absolute goddess. She was wearing a custom-made midnight blue velvet gown by an exclusive Parisian haute couture house that didn't sell to the public, they only designed for royalty. The dress hugged her curves perfectly before cascading into a dramatic sweeping train. The neckline was elegant, leaving her collarbones bare to showcase the jewelry. And the jewelry. Around Penelope's neck rested the Valois Bourgogne sapphire choker, a legendary piece of history featuring a terrifyingly large, flawless salon sapphire surrounded by diamonds, a piece that hadn't been photographed in public since the 1920s. Matching diamond drops hung from her ears. Her hair was styled in sleek, old Hollywood waves, and her makeup was flawless, highlighting the sharp, confident geometry of her face. She exuded an aura of untouchable, lethal grace. The paparazzi went into an absolute frenzy. Flashes strobed like a lightning storm. Penelope is that Penelope Hayes. A society reporter from the New York Post shrieked, recognizing her from the old, unflattering divorce articles. But the shock was far from over. Penelope didn't walk forward. She turned back toward the open door of the Bentley, extending a delicate, manicured hand. A man stepped out into the flashing lights. He was devastatingly handsome, wearing a flawless midnight blue tuxedo with a subtle aristocratic sash peeking from his tailored jacket. He took Penelope's hand, lifting it to his lips for a brief public kiss before tucking her arms securely into his. "Oh my God!" A woman in a fur coat whispered to her husband near the steps. "That's Prince Dominic. That's the Prince of Valois Bourgogne. What is he doing here?" "And who is that with him?" Her husband replied, completely bewildered. I think that's Gregory Wallace's ex-wife." The whispers hit the crowd like a tidal wave. Prince Dominic, the elusive, ridiculously wealthy European royal who practically owned half of Monaco's real estate and rarely made public appearances. And the discarded starter wife was holding on to him like he was hers. Dominic leaned down his lips, brushing Penelope's ear. "Are you ready, my love?" He murmured, his voice completely calm amidst the chaos of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. "Let's go find table 89. Penelope smiled, her eyes flashing with a dangerous crystalline light. Flanked by their 4 security guards, the royal couple ascended the red-carpeted steps of the plaza. The hotel management had rushed out the moment the Bentley arrived, completely bypassing the wedding planner. The general manager of the plaza himself was practically bowing as he held the doors open for them. "Your Highness," the manager stammered, "we were not informed of your arrival. It is a profound honor. We are here for the Kensington Wallace reception." Dominic said coolly, his voice carrying the effortless authority of a man who owned the room before he even entered it. They stepped into the grand foyer. The heavy gilded doors to the grand ballroom were closed. Inside, the DJ had just announced the grand entrance of the bride and groom. Penelope stood before the doors, the sapphire at her throat catching the light of the chandeliers. She was no longer the girl who cried over unpaid bills. She was Her Serene Highness. And it was time to crash a wedding. Inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the atmosphere was suffocatingly triumphant. The 500 guests, a meticulously curated collection of New York's elite hedge fund managers, socialites, and real estate tycoons, had taken their seats. The crystal chandeliers had been dimmed to cast a flattering golden glow over the sea of white orchids and silver cutlery. The string quartet had seamlessly transitioned into an upbeat modern orchestral piece, signaling the impending arrival of the newlyweds. Francois, the highly strung wedding planner, stood near the front with his clipboard pressed against his chest, barking hushed orders into his headset. "Lights up on the center aisle. Cue the music. They are walking in." Vanessa Kensington and Gregory Wallace stood just behind the secondary set of doors, waiting for their grand introduction. Vanessa was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. She had won. She had the billionaire husband, the $1 million wedding, and the undivided attention of high society. And somewhere in the back of the room, hidden near the swinging doors of the kitchen, she imagined Penelope sitting in quiet, pathetic humiliation. It was the cherry on top of a perfect day. "Ladies and gentlemen," the booming voice of the master of ceremonies echoed through the cavernous ballroom, silencing the murmurs of the elite crowd. "Please rise and welcome for the very first time as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Gregory and Vanessa Wallace." Au soir, the room erupted into polite, synchronized applause. The secondary doors swung open, and Gregory and Vanessa stepped into the spotlight. Vanessa beamed her diamond tiara, sparkling under the carefully positioned spotlights. They began their slow, majestic walk down the center aisle, waving to the cheering guests. But their triumphant parade was abruptly derailed. Just as Gregory and Vanessa reached the center of the dance floor, preparing to transition into their choreographed first dance, a massive commotion erupted near the main entrance at the back of the ballroom. The heavy gilded doors, which were supposed to remain locked until the food service began, did not just open. They were aggressively thrust apart. The sound of the heavy wood slamming against the doorstops echoed like a gunshot, slicing through the polite applause and the orchestral music. The string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a note in sheer surprise. The applause sputtered and died completely. 500 heads turned simultaneously toward the back of the room. Vanessa froze, her smile hardening into a grotesque mask of confusion. Gregory frowned, annoyed that their spotlight had been stolen. He squinted past the glaring spotlights, trying to see what idiot had dared to interrupt their moment. 4 men in immaculately tailored dark suits strode into the ballroom. They did not walk like wedding guests. They moved in a tight, impenetrable diamond formation, their eyes scanning the room with cold, clinical precision. They were Dominic's elite royal security detail, and they instantly commanded the space. They flanked the entrance, their hands resting subtly near their lapels, effectively taking control of the main access point. Francois dropped his clipboard. "Hey, you cannot be in here. This is a private event," he hissed, rushing toward the security men. One of the guards simply turned his head, leveling a stare so completely devoid of warmth and so violently authoritative that Francois instantly stopped in his tracks, the blood draining from his face. The planner backed away slowly, his hands raised in silent surrender. Then the true disruption began. Stepping through the newly secured threshold was Penelope. The collective intake of breath from the 500 guests sounded like a vacuum sealing the room. Penelope paused just inside the doorway, allowing the ambient light of the ballroom to catch the magnificent Valois Bourgogne sapphire resting against her collarbone. The midnight blue velvet of her custom Parisian gown drank in the light, making her look like a creature born of royalty and shadows. She did not look at the floor. She did not look intimidated. Her chin was lifted, her posture impeccable, radiating an aura of absolute terrifying power. Beside her, holding her arm with possessive grace, was Prince Dominic. He looked completely unbothered by the hundreds of staring eyes, his aristocratic features set in a mask of mild, almost bored amusement. He was a predator walking into a cage of terrified domestic birds. Near the front of the room, Gregory's mother, Brenda, let out a strangled gasp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers, shattering against the polished marble floor. The sharp crack of breaking glass was the only sound in the completely silent ballroom. "Is that—" A prominent hedge fund manager seated at table 3 whispered to his wife, his eyes bulging. "Is that Prince Dominic of Valois Bourgogne?" "And who is the woman with him?" His wife replied, her voice trembling with excitement. "Look at that necklace. That's a crown jewel. I read about it in an auction magazine 10 years ago." Gregory felt the blood rush to his ears, a deafening roar replacing the silence. He stared at the woman standing at the back of the room. It was Penelope. He knew it was Penelope, but his brain refused to reconcile the image of the woman he had discarded with the magnificent, untouchable queen standing before him. Where was the clearance rack dress? Where was the pathetic, broken demeanor he had expected? She looked like she could buy him his new wife, and this entire hotel with pocket change. Vanessa's reaction was entirely different. Her face contorted from confusion to sheer, unadulterated rage. Her hands clenched into fists, the manicured nails digging into her palms. She recognized Penelope instantly, and the sight of her exuding such flawless glamour felt like a physical blow. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa hissed under her breath to Gregory, her voice trembling with fury. "And how did she get a dress like that? Who is that man?" Before Gregory could formulate a response, Dominic leaned down and whispered something to Penelope. A small, devastatingly confident smile touched her lips. Slowly, deliberately, the royal couple began to walk forward. They did not slink toward the shadows. They walked straight down the center aisle, the very path that Vanessa and Gregory had just paraded down. As they moved, the guests instinctively leaned back, giving them a wide berth. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. The wedding guests were no longer looking at the bride and groom. They were completely mesmerized by the unexpected arrival of genuine European royalty. As Penelope walked past the tables of people who had snubbed her, gossiped about her, and celebrated her downfall, she kept her gaze forward. She did not offer them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. She was completely above them. Francois, desperate to regain control of his ruined timeline, scurried up to Penelope and Dominic as they reached the middle of the room. Excuse me, Ms. Hayes, you are late. You are disrupting the grand entrance. Your assigned seat is table 89 right back there." He stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the dark corner near the kitchen doors. Dominic stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at the wedding planner. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Table 89. Dominic repeated, his voice low, smooth, and carrying a lethal edge that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "You wish to seat my wife, Her Serene Highness, the Princess of Valois Bourgogne, next to the swinging doors of a kitchen." The words "my wife" and "Her Serene Highness" dropped like heavy stones into the silent room. Francois turned a shade of sickly gray. "Princess," he squeaked. Gregory stumbled backward, actually stepping on the train of Vanessa's $1,000,000 gown. Vanessa let out a sharp cry of annoyance, but Gregory didn't notice. His mind was short-circuiting. Princess Penelope was a princess. Dominic did not wait for the wedding planner to recover. He He turned his devastating gaze toward the front of the room, locking eyes directly with Gregory and Vanessa. A slow, chilling smile spread across the prince's face. It seems there has been a profound error in your seating arrangements, Dominic announced, his voice projecting effortlessly to every corner of the vast ballroom. But do not worry, we shall correct it ourselves. He snapped his fingers once. The sharp sound echoed like thunder. Immediately, the 4 royal security guards moved. They bypassed the terrified wedding planner and marched straight past the stunned bride and groom, heading directly toward the very front of the room. The disruption escalated from a mere shock to a full-blown hostile takeover. The 4 royal guards did not march toward the back of the room where table 89 was hidden. Instead, they moved with military precision to the VIP section, right at the edge of the dance floor where the parents of the bride and groom were seated. This area was strictly reserved for the Kensington and Wallace families. It was the prime real estate of the ballroom, offering the best view, the best service, and the most prestige. Table 1, a massive, elaborately decorated round table, seated Vanessa's billionaire father, her mother, and Gregory's parents, including the horrified Brenda. The lead security guard, a towering man with a distinct scar above his left eyebrow, approached the head waiter, who was frozen holding a silver tray of caviar. "Clear a path." The guard commanded his tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, 2 of the guards grabbed a pristine, empty reserve table located near the side wall and bodily carried it directly to the center edge of the dance floor, placing it right in front of table 1. They were effectively creating a new superior VIP section that blocked the view of the bride and groom's parents. "What are they doing?" Brenda shrieked, clutching her pearl necklace, as the guards aggressively repositioned massive floral arrangements to create a perimeter around the newly placed table. "Gregory, stop them. They are ruining the sightlines." Vanessa's father, Richard Kensington, a man used to terrifying boardrooms into submission, stood up, his face purple with indignation. "See here, you cannot do this. This is my daughter's wedding, security. Where is the hotel security?" The general manager of the Plaza Hotel had just scurried into the room, sweating profusely. He sprinted over to Mr. Kensington, bowing frantically. "Mr. Kensington, please, I beg you to remain calm. That is Prince Dominic. We cannot interfere with royal security protocols. Diplomatic immunity applies to his protection detail. If we intervene, it will become an international incident." Kensington stared at the manager, utterly flabbergasted. Diplomatic immunity. At my daughter's wedding, while chaos reigned at the front of the room, Dominic gently placed his hand on the small of Penelope's back, guiding her forward. They walked past the bewildered guests, past the frozen, fuming bride and the completely dumbstruck groom, and approached their newly established table. One of the guards pulled out a chair for Penelope. She sat down with effortless grace, smoothing the velvet skirt of her gown. Dominic took the seat beside her. They were perfectly positioned right on the edge of the dance floor. Anyone who wanted to look at the bride and groom would have to look past the radiant, terrifyingly wealthy royal couple first. Vanessa felt tears of absolute fury pricking her eyes. This was her day. She had spent a year planning every meticulous detail to ensure she was the sole center of attention. She had specifically invited Penelope to watch her triumph. Instead, Penelope had hijacked the entire event without raising her voice. "Gregory!" Vanessa hissed, grabbing his arm so tightly her nails drew blood. "Do something. Throw her out. Now." Gregory was paralyzed. He looked at Penelope sitting there bathed in the glow of the chandelier, wearing a sapphire that was likely worth more than his entire financial firm. He remembered how he had told her she lacked the sophistication for high society. He remembered leaving her in their cramped apartment feeling utterly superior. Now looking at her beside a European prince, Gregory felt small, insignificant, and incredibly foolish. I can't," Gregory stammered. "Vanessa, look at them. They have armed guards. The hotel manager won't even touch them." "I don't care." Vanessa whisper-screamed, her composure entirely shattered. Her carefully curated image of the graceful, magnanimous bride was crumbling by the second. She is ruining everything. Everyone is looking at her. It was true. The 500 guests were completely ignoring the newlyweds standing awkwardly in the middle of the dance floor. The whispers had grown into a loud, buzzing cacophony of frantic gossip. Cell phones were being discreetly pulled out, cameras flashing without the flash, trying to capture pictures of the prince and his stunning princess. Penelope sat perfectly still, observing the chaos she had unleashed with cool detachment. She caught Gregory's eye. He was staring at her with a pathetic mixture of regret, shock, and awe. Penelope did not smile. She simply raised a solitary, perfectly shaped eyebrow, an expression that clearly communicated, "You threw away diamond to collect cheap stones." Gregory swallowed hard, breaking eye contact and looking down at the floor, absolutely humiliated. "Well," Dominic said softly, leaning toward Penelope, a dangerous, amused glint in his hazel eyes. "I must say American weddings are significantly more entertaining than the state banquets back home." Penelope finally let a genuine smile grace her lips. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "It certainly has its moments, darling." Suddenly, a sharp clinking sound pierced the chaotic murmurs. Vanessa's father, refusing to be upstaged, had grabbed a heavy silver spoon and was aggressively hitting his crystal wine glass. "Attention! Attention, everyone!" Mr. Kensington bellowed, his voice booming over the microphone he had snatched from the terrified MC. "We will not let uninvited disruptions ruin this magnificent evening. I demand that the music resume. Let my daughter and her new husband have their first dance." The DJ, sweating profusely, scrambled to press play. The syrupy notes of an acoustic love song began to drift through the tense air of the ballroom. Gregory tried to pull Vanessa into his arms to begin the choreographed dance they had practiced for months. But Vanessa was too rigid, her eyes locked with pure hatred on Penelope's back. The dance was stiff, awkward, and completely devoid of romance. They shuffled around the floor, their smiles forced and brittle. Meanwhile, Penelope and Dominic completely ignored them. The royal guards had seamlessly signaled the hotel's elite catering staff. While the rest of the guests were forced to wait for the official dinner service to begin, a line of white-gloved waiters marched toward Penelope and Dominic's table, carrying silver cloches. They lifted the covers simultaneously, revealing two perfectly plated, custom-ordered portions of beluga caviar and perfectly seared Wagyu beef dishes that were entirely absent from Vanessa's carefully selected, budget-conscious catering menu. Brenda Wallace, sitting just behind them at the now-obscured table 1, watched in absolute horror as Penelope, the woman she had viciously mocked for wearing thrift store fashion, was served a meal fit for a sovereign, while the bride and groom awkwardly swayed to the music utterly eclipsed at their own $1 million wedding. The ultimate revenge had not required a single harsh word or a messy confrontation. Penelope had simply shown up, claimed her space, and allowed the blinding reality of her new life to utterly destroy the fragile, superficial world her ex-husband had built. As the first dance mercifully ended to scattered, distracted applause, Penelope took a delicate sip of vintage champagne, the sapphire sparkling at her throat, knowing the night had only just begun. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom had shifted from a celebration of marital union to a high-stakes psychological hostage situation. The 500 guests were entirely captivated by the royal couple seated at the edge of the dance floor, completely ignoring the carefully curated timeline of the Kensington-Wallace wedding. Dinner service was a chaotic, disorganized mess. While Penelope and Prince Dominic dined on their custom-ordered Wagyu and caviar, the rest of the ballroom picked at lukewarm chicken and overcooked sea bass. The waitstaff, utterly terrified by the presence of the towering royal security detail, were deliberately avoiding the front of the room, leaving Vanessa's VIP table parched and fuming. Vanessa sat rigidly beside Gregory, her knuckles white as she gripped her crystal water goblet. Her dream wedding had become an agonizing spectacle of her own irrelevance. She could hear the whispers radiating from the tables around them. They weren't talking about her Vera Wang gown or the $1 million floral budget. They were aggressively debating the carat weight of the Valois Bourgogne sapphire, currently resting against Penelope's collarbone. "This is intolerable," Harrison Kensington, Vanessa's father, muttered, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the silverware rattled. He signaled aggressively to Francois, the trembling wedding planner who was hiding behind a pillar. "Get the speeches started, now. We need to regain control of this room before it turns into a complete circus." Francois practically sprinted to the DJ booth, waving his arms frantically. The background music was abruptly cut off, replaced by the sharp, high-pitched squeal of microphone feedback that made half the room wince. Harrison Kensington rose to his feet, snatching the microphone from the best man. He strode to the center of the dance floor, positioning himself directly between the newlyweds' table and Penelope's commandeered royal section. He was a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and dictating terms, and he intended to bully the room back into submission through sheer volume and authoritative presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison boomed his voice, echoing off the vaulted, gilded ceilings. "If I could have your undivided attention directed to where it actually belongs, to my beautiful daughter Vanessa and her new husband Gregory." A smattering of polite, incredibly awkward applause rippled through the room. A few guests guiltily dragged their eyes away from Prince Dominic, but most simply pretended to listen while secretly keeping the royal couple in their peripheral vision. Harrison forced a jovial, booming laugh that sounded entirely hollow. "We are gathered here to celebrate a union of equals, a partnership built on ambition, pedigree, and true success. Gregory is a brilliant young man, a rising titan in the financial sector. He possesses the drive and the class necessary to join the Kensington family. It takes a certain caliber of individual to appreciate the finer things in life, and an even stronger individual to leave behind the dead weight of the past to step into a glorious future." The entire ballroom collectively inhaled. The thinly veiled insult was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Harrison Kensington was publicly referencing Penelope as dead weight. At the royal table, Penelope did not flinch. She slowly lowered her crystal champagne flute to the table, her face an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Prince Dominic, however, stopped smiling. The mild, amused glint in his hazel eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying darkness. He slowly turned his gaze toward Harrison, looking at the billionaire real estate tycoon with the detached clinical interest of a man inspecting a particularly irritating insect. "Yes," Harrison continued, emboldened by the silent room. "Vanessa and Gregory represent the pinnacle of New York society. They have built an empire together, and I want to raise a glass to the fact that they never settled for mediocrity, no matter who tried to drag them down to the bottom tier." "Hear, hear," Brenda Wallace chimed in loudly from table 1, raising her glass with a vicious, triumphant smirk. Gregory, to his credit, looked violently ill. He sank lower in his chair, staring at the tablecloth, wishing the intricate marble floor would simply swallow him whole. He knew exactly what his new father-in-law was doing, and he knew it was a catastrophic mistake. Before Harrison could take a sip of his wine to finalize the toast, a sound cut through the silence. It was the sharp, distinct sound of a silver knife gently tapping against a crystal glass. Clink, clink, clink. Every head snapped toward the noise. Prince Dominic was standing up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and commanded absolute obedience from the room. He did not rush. He buttoned the jacket of his midnight blue tuxedo with one hand, his posture impeccable. He did not ask for a microphone. He simply possessed the natural booming acoustics of a man born to address parliaments and command armies. A toast to the future indeed." Dominic's voice resonated through the ballroom, smooth as aged cognac but laced with razor wire. "Mr. Kensington speaks passionately about empires and dead weight. It is a fascinating perspective on modern commerce and loyalty." Harrison bristled, his face flushing crimson. "Your Highness, this is a private family toast, and I am a guest." Dominic interrupted smoothly his tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. The 4 royal guards flanking the table immediately stepped half a pace forward, their hands resting menacingly on their lapels. Harrison snapped his mouth shut. Dominic stepped out from behind his table, moving toward the center of the floor. He stopped a few feet away from Harrison, towering over the older man. "I find myself compelled to speak on the nature of rising titans and financial success." Dominic continued, his gaze drifting over to Gregory, who was sweating profusely. You see, true wealth is not measured by the ostentatious display of rented orchids in a hotel ballroom. True wealth requires a foundation of integrity, something that unfortunately seems entirely absent from the groom's portfolio. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpets. Vanessa let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Ooh. When my wife, Her Serene Highness, generously informed me of the history she shared with Mr. Wallace, Dominic said, pacing slowly, commanding the floor like a predator circling wounded prey, I was intrigued. I had my Sovereign Wealth Fund's private intelligence division look into his boutique financial firm. Just out of morbid curiosity, you understand. Gregory's head snapped up, his eyes wide with stark, unadulterated terror. It is remarkable. Dominic mused, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. How a firm can project an image of phenomenal success while simultaneously carrying a toxic debt-to-income ratio that borders on federal fraud. The multi-million-dollar acquisition deal Mr. Wallace supposedly secured last year heavily leveraged against phantom assets. The company is essentially a house of cards waiting for a strong breeze. Or perhaps a royal decree. Pandemonium threatened to break out. Several hedge fund managers in the crowd, men who had actively invested in Gregory's firm, immediately pulled out their phones, their faces pale with panic. Gregory leaped to his feet, knocking his chair backward with a loud crash. "That is a lie!" Gregory shouted, his voice cracking hysterically. "You have no right. This is slander." Dominic turned to Gregory, his expression freezing into a mask of pure absolute power. A prince does not slander Mr. Wallace. A prince states facts. If you wish to dispute the audit findings of the Valois Bourgogne Global Investment Bank, you are welcome to file a grievance with my legal department in Geneva. I'm sure they will schedule a meeting for you sometime in the next decade. Dominic turned back to the crowd, raising an empty hand as if holding a spectral glass. So I raise a toast to Mr. Gregory Wallace. May his new marriage provide him with the substantial financial bailout he so desperately requires to avoid federal indictment. He turned on his heel and walked gracefully back to his table, leaving a completely devastated, hyperventilating groom, a sobbing bride, and a ballroom drowning in catastrophic whispers. Penelope looked up at him as he sat down, a slow, brilliant smile illuminating her features. The reception did not recover. The celebratory energy had been entirely obliterated, replaced by a frantic, paranoid atmosphere of a corporate disaster. Half of the guests, specifically the financial elite who had ties to Gregory's firm, had already abandoned their barely touched meals and fled to the lobby, desperately making hushed phone calls to their lawyers and asset managers. The dance floor remained agonizingly empty. Vanessa was inconsolable, weeping violently into a silk napkin while her mother attempted to pat her shoulder. Her meticulously planned million-dollar society wedding was actively dissolving into the most humiliating public scandal of the decade. Harrison Kensington was pacing furiously near the exit, screaming into his cell phone, demanding his personal financial advisors verify Dominic's devastating claims. Amidst the wreckage of the evening, Penelope finally stood up. "I believe," she said softly, smoothing the velvet skirt of her Parisian gown, "I would like to visit the powder room before we depart." Dominic nodded, offering a gentle smile. "Take your time, my love. The car will be waiting." Two of the towering security guards immediately detached from the perimeter flanking Penelope as she glided across the ballroom. The remaining guests parted like the Red Sea, refusing to make eye contact with the woman who had just orchestrated the utter destruction of the groom without lifting a single finger. The ladies' lounge at the plaza was an opulent sanctuary of marble-gilded mirrors and crystal sconces. Penelope stepped inside the heavy oak doors, closing silently behind her guards, who remained stationed outside in the hallway. She walked over to the vanity, examining her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger to the exhausted, terrified girl who had signed divorce papers 3 years ago. She was untouchable. Before she could retrieve her lipstick from her clutch, the lounge doors burst open. Gregory practically stumbled into the room, his tuxedo rumpled his tie, hanging loosely around his neck. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He had managed to slip past the guards by using a secondary service hallway he remembered from a hotel tour. Penelope. He gasped, his voice ragged. Penelope, please. Penelope did not turn around immediately. She slowly capped her lipstick, placed it back into her clutch, and then pivoted on her stilettos, her expression as cold and unforgiving as the sapphire at her throat. Gregory, she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. You are in the women's restroom, and you look entirely pathetic. You have to stop him. Gregory begged, closing the distance between them, though he smartly stopped a few feet away when he saw the icy warning in her eyes. You have to tell Dominic to call off his banks. If he releases that audit to the regulatory agencies, my firm is dead. I'm dead. I'll lose everything. Penelope stared at him, tilting her head slightly. You lost everything of value the day you decided my loyalty wasn't glamorous enough for your new lifestyle. What you are losing now is merely money. It shouldn't hurt this much, considering how easily you throw things away. I was stupid. Gregory cried out a desperate, ugly sound. I made a mistake, okay, Vanessa. She's a nightmare. Her family's a nightmare. I only married her for the capital, for the connections. But you were real. We built that firm together, Pen. You can't just let him destroy our legacy. Our legacy. Penelope laughed, a sharp, crystalline sound that echoed off the marble walls. It held no humor, only deep, absolute disdain. You erased my name from the founding documents before the ink on our divorce was dry. You paraded your new billionaire heiress around town and leaked stories to the press calling me a dreary, uncultured starter wife. And then you mailed me an invitation to your wedding and ordered your wedding planner to seat me next to the kitchen garbage out of sheer, unadulterated malice. She took a step forward, towering over him in her stilettos, her aura completely overpowering his trembling frame. I didn't tell Dominic to investigate you, Gregory. She whispered, her tone lethal. He did that on his own because a man who actually loves his wife protects her. You built a house of cards, and you invited a hurricane to the party. You did this to yourself. Gregory fell to his knees, utterly broken, tears streaming down his face. Please, I have nothing left. You have Vanessa, Penelope replied coldly. I suggest you go find her. She looks like she needs a shoulder to cry on. Without another word, Penelope turned and walked out of the lounge. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving Gregory kneeling alone on the cold marble floor of the women's restroom, surrounded by the ruins of his ambition. When Penelope returned to the ballroom, the space was practically deserted. Only a few confused stragglers remained. Dominic was standing near the grand exit, his security detail perfectly aligned, holding her silver wrap. Did you enjoy your walk? Dominic asked, his eyes crinkling with warmth as he draped the wrap over her shoulders. It was remarkably refreshing. Penelope smiled, taking his arm. Are we ready to leave? Just one final piece of business, Dominic murmured. Harrison Kensington, looking haggard and defeated, had approached them, flanked by his own panicked security. Your Highness, Harrison said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogant bluster. My advisors just confirmed your statements. If you release that information, the resultant scandal will destroy my daughter's reputation by association. The Kensington Corporation relies on public trust. What do you want? Name your price. Dominic looked down at the billionaire tycoon, a shark staring at a minnow. I do not need your money, Mr. Kensington. I have considerably more of it than you do. Then what? Harrison pleaded. A lesson in hospitality. Dominic stated coldly. My sovereign wealth fund recently acquired the primary debt on 3 of your flagship Manhattan properties, including, incidentally, the very building where your new son-in-law leases his office space. Effective Monday, the Wallace financial firm is being evicted. And as for you, Mr. Kensington, I strongly suggest you learn how to properly treat the people you invite to dinner. The next time you attempt to humiliate my wife, I will not just ruin your son-in-law. I will buy your entire company and turn it into a parking lot. Harrison Kensington stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently, utterly emasculated in front of the few remaining staff and guests. Dominic did not wait for a response. He turned to Penelope, offering his arm. Shall we, Your Highness? Let's go home, darling, Penelope said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent, devastated ballroom. They walked out through the gilded doors, leaving the wreckage of the Wallace-Kensington wedding behind them. They descended the red-carpeted steps of the plaza, where the massive armored Bentley was waiting its engine purring under the New York streetlights. As the door closed, sealing them in opulent privacy, Penelope leaned her head against Dominic's shoulder, the sapphire catching the moonlight. The ultimate revenge had been executed flawlessly, proving that true class doesn't scream for attention. It simply arrives and commands the room. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the Carlyle, casting long golden beams across the imported Egyptian cotton sheets. Penelope woke up slowly, the lingering scent of Dominic's sandalwood cologne wrapping around her. The frantic, aggressive energy of the previous night felt like a distant, chaotic dream, cleanly separated from the serene reality of her morning. She sat up, pulling a silk robe around her shoulders, and walked into the expansive living area of the suite. Dominic was already awake, seated at a mahogany dining table that overlooked the sweeping green expanse of Central Park. He was dressed flawlessly as always in a crisp white linen shirt and tailored trousers, calmly sipping a shot of espresso while reading a tablet. "Good morning, Your Highness," Dominic murmured, not looking up from his screen, though a warm, knowing smile spread across his face. "Good morning," Penelope replied, pouring herself a cup of black coffee from the silver service tray on the counter. She walked over and stood behind him, resting her chin on his shoulder. "What is the verdict from the outside world? Dominic tapped the screen of his tablet, bringing up the digital front pages of New York's most vicious and prominent society publications, as well as the Global Financial Times. The media explosion had been instantaneous and catastrophic. The headlines were merciless. The Manhattan Post royal ruin, Prince Dominic crashes billion-dollar plaza, wedding exposes groom's fraud. The Financial Chronicle, Wallace Financial under federal scrutiny following sovereign wealth tip-off. High Society Weekly, The Starter Wife Strikes Back. Penelope Hayes returns as a princess, humiliates Kensington heiress. It appears, Dominic noted dryly, scrolling through a particularly scathing article detailing the mass exodus of the wedding guests, that your former mother-in-law Brenda was photographed weeping hysterically in the lobby of the plaza while clutching a centerpiece she attempted to steal. A truly fascinating display of high society grace. Penelope let out a soft, elegant laugh, walking around the table to take her seat. "I suppose the country club will be having an emergency board meeting to revoke her membership by noon today. Harrison Kensington must be utterly losing his mind." Penelope's assessment of the Kensington patriarch was entirely accurate. 4 miles away, in a stark, aggressively modern penthouse overlooking the financial district, the atmosphere was completely unhinged. Gregory Wallace had not slept. He was sitting on the edge of a pristine white leather sofa, his head in his hands, staring blankly at the imported hardwood floor. His tuxedo jacket was discarded in a crumpled heap near the door. The silence of the penthouse was broken only by the sound of Vanessa screaming. She was pacing the length of the room, clutching her phone, screaming at her team of public relations managers, crisis fixers, and her father's corporate lawyers. Her face was puffy, her eyes red and swollen from hours of furious crying. The magical $1 million wedding she had meticulously planned to elevate her social status had permanently etched her into the annals of New York's most humiliating society disasters. "I don't care what it costs!" Vanessa shrieked into the phone, hurling a crystal coaster across the room where it shattered against the wall. "Scrub the pictures from the internet issue, a statement saying we are separating immediately. I want an annulment. My father is filing the papers on Monday morning. I'm not going down with this pathetic bankrupt loser fault." Gregory flinched as the coaster shattered. He slowly raised his head, looking at the woman he had abandoned Penelope to marry. There was no love in Vanessa's eyes. There was only revulsion, panic, and the cold, calculating instinct of a billionaire heiress cutting away dead tissue to save the host body. "Vanessa." Gregory croaked his throat, raw and dry. "Vanessa, please. We are married. We are supposed to be a team. We can fight this. My lawyers can fight the audit." Vanessa stopped pacing and turned to look at him. She looked at him with the exact same expression of visceral disgust one might reserve for something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. A team. She spat out, her voice dripping with venom. You lied to me. You lied to my father. You paraded around like a titan of industry, and you are nothing but a hollow, over-leveraged fraud. You embarrassed me in front of 500 of the most powerful people in the country. You brought that royal nightmare into my wedding. She's my ex-wife. You were the one who insisted on inviting her. Gregory yelled, his own panic finally breaking through his paralysis. You wanted to put her in the back by the kitchen? You wanted to humiliate her. You provoked her. Because you told me she was a pathetic broke nobody. Vanessa screamed back, her face contorting into an ugly, hateful mask. You told me she was living in a studio apartment. You failed to mention she had married Prince Dominic of the Valois-Bourgogne dynasty. My father's stock dropped 4% in pre-market trading this morning, just by association with you. You're done, Gregory. Get out of my penthouse. Before Gregory could formulate a defense, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open, revealing two men in sharp charcoal gray suits holding thick manila folders. They were not hotel security. They were Harrison Kensington's elite corporate fixers. The lead fixer stepped into the penthouse, entirely ignoring Vanessa, and locked his cold, dead eyes on Gregory. Mr. Wallace. The man said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I'm serving you with formal papers of annulment on behalf of Ms. Kensington, citing severe financial fraud and misrepresentation. Furthermore, as per the directives of the Valois-Bourgogne Global Investment Bank, which now holds the primary lease on your commercial office space, you are hereby served with a notice of immediate eviction. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to vacate the premises, at which point federal auditors will be seizing your servers. Gregory stared at the thick manila envelopes the fixer tossed onto the glass coffee table. The heavy, sickening realization finally crashed over him, suffocating him. He had traded a loyal, brilliant woman for a superficial empire built on sand, and a single silent move from the queen he discarded had brought the entire structure crashing down on his head. He had absolutely nothing left. 6 months later, the bitter, freezing winds of January whipped through the canyon-like streets of Manhattan. The scandal of the Plaza Hotel wedding had long since faded from the aggressive 24-hour news cycle, replaced by newer, fresher political scandals and celebrity divorces. High society has a notoriously short memory for those who fall from grace and a ruthless tendency to surgically excise the infected members from their ranks. Gregory Wallace sat in a cramped, poorly lit cubicle on the 14th floor of a mid-level accounting firm in Queens. He was staring at a glowing spreadsheet, his eyes bloodshot, a cheap, lukewarm cup of deli coffee resting precariously on his cluttered desk. The bespoke Tom Ford suits were gone, sold to a luxury consignment shop months ago to pay for his mounting legal fees. He was currently wearing an off-the-rack polyester blend suit that chafed his neck. His boutique financial firm was entirely dissolved. The federal audit triggered by Dominic's sovereign wealth fund had uncovered exactly what the prince promised it would: massive, deeply unethical leveraging phantom assets and severe mismanagement of client funds. Gregory hadn't gone to prison. Harrison Kensington had quietly paid off a few key judges to ensure the federal investigation didn't drag the Kensington name through a televised criminal trial, but Gregory had been permanently stripped of his financial licenses and heavily fined. Vanessa had secured her annulment within 4 weeks. She had immediately relocated to Paris, fleeing the New York gossip circle, and was currently dating an Italian shipping magnate. Gregory had not spoken to her since the morning after the wedding. Brenda Wallace had been ousted from her country club and forced to downsize her suburban mansion to pay for her son's legal defense. The humiliation had broken her completely. She now spent her days posting passive-aggressive quotes on Facebook, completely ignored by the wealthy friends who used to drink champagne in her living room. Gregory sighed heavily, rubbing his temples, as a sharp migraine threatened to bloom behind his eyes. He reached out to grab his coffee, his hand brushing against a glossy magazine someone had left on the corner of his desk. It was the latest issue of Global Philanthropy Monthly. Gregory froze. Staring back at him from the glossy cover, bathed in the soft golden light of a professional studio, was Penelope, She looked absolutely magnificent. She wasn't wearing the heavy, intimidating crown jewels from the wedding night. Instead, she wore a simple, impeccably tailored white blazer, her hair styled in effortless waves. The headline below her radiant smile read, "The Princess of Purpose." Her Serene Highness, Penelope of Valois-Bourgogne, launches a $3 billion global education initiative for underprivileged women. Gregory's hand trembled as he slowly opened the magazine, flipping to the feature article. The pages were filled with photographs of Penelope walking through rural villages in Southeast Asia, shaking hands with international dignitaries at the United Nations, and standing beside a fiercely proud Prince Dominic at a gala in Monaco. The article detailed her brilliant mind, her deep empathy, and her unwavering dedication to utilizing her newfound platform for genuine systemic global change. It spoke of her background, briefly mentioning she had overcome significant personal betrayals and financial hardships in her past, which had forged her ironclad commitment to helping women achieve financial independence. There was no mention of Gregory. There was no mention of the firm they had built together, the sacrifices she had made for him, or the vicious, humiliating way he had discarded her. To the writer of the article, to the global community, and clearly to Penelope herself, Gregory Wallace was not a villain, a nemesis, or even a regret. He was simply erased. He was a non-entity, a ghost in the brilliant, blinding light of her ascendance. Gregory read a specific quote from Penelope, highlighted in bold text in the center of the page. "The greatest vengeance against those who try to diminish your worth is not to destroy them in return. It is to outgrow them so completely that they cannot even comprehend the atmosphere in which you now breathe." A profound, suffocating weight settled into Gregory's chest. For months he had been consumed by a toxic cocktail of anger, resentment, and a pathetic hope that Penelope might eventually show him some shred of pity. He had secretly hoped that her grand display at the wedding was proof that she still cared, that she was still emotionally invested in him, even if that investment manifested as hatred. Hate, after all, requires energy. Hate means you still matter. But looking at the photographs, reading her articulate, passionate words about global economics and human rights, the devastating truth finally settled into his bones. She didn't hate him. She pitied him, perhaps, on that night at the plaza. But now she didn't think about him at all. She had not hijacked his wedding out of petty jealousy. She had done it simply to close the book, to slam the door on a lesser life, and to demonstrate to her new husband that she was entirely, unapologetically free. "Wallace." A sharp, nasally voice barked from the end of the aisle. It was Gregory's new manager, a 26-year-old accounting graduate who relentlessly micromanaged him. "I needed those Q3 projections 10 minutes ago. Stop reading magazines on company time and get back to work." Gregory flinched, the sharp reprimand echoing in the dull gray cubicle farm. "Yes, sir, right away." He looked down at the magazine cover one last time. Penelope's eyes seemed to look right through him, focused on a horizon he could never hope to reach. Gregory slowly closed the magazine, slid it into the recycling bin under his desk, and turned back to his glowing spreadsheet, entirely consumed by the quiet, devastating silence of the life he had earned. And that brings us to the end of Penelope's incredible journey from discarded wife to global royalty. She proved that the ultimate revenge isn't sinking to their level, but rising so high they can no longer even reach your shadow. What did you think of Penelope's breathtaking comeback and Gregory's ultimate downfall? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this story of high society drama, instant karma, and royal triumph, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good revenge story, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping audio dramas. See you next time.